All right, picture this. A Christian, a Muslim, and an atheist each wake up on their own island. The islands are basically identical, same size, same resources, same climate. For all intents and purposes, each man owns his own island, his land, his food, his water, his little chunk of planet Earth. In this scenario, these are the only three beings alive on Earth. They've all figured out how to survive on their own. None of them needs the others to live. But now, unlike the old guy stuck on the island alone in Thought Experiment from Chapter 1, these three can reach each other by boat. They can visit, they can trade, or they can fight. They can even kill each other. They all have knives, tools, and weapons. And just to make this more interesting, none of them trusts the other two. In fact, each one despises the other's beliefs. So here's the question that matters. How do these three men coexist without ending up in a permanent state of war? Because that's not just a thought experiment. That's human history. That's the world right now. That's your neighborhood. That's your workplace. That is our country. Before we answer that question, let's do a little quick recap of Chapter 1. First, a man alone on an island with no one to affect but himself can't do anything morally wrong because there's no one there to hurt. There's no victim. And he can't really do moral good either because there's no one to help. Morality only makes sense when our actions affect others. Second, thoughts alone are not immoral. You can't choose what pops into your mind. It can only cross the moral line when you act on those thoughts. Third, humans are not created equal. We are not raised equally. We don't have equal IQs, equal temperaments, equal circumstances. So the fantasy of true equality in outcomes is just that, a fantasy. And finally, people don't agree on what is moral. A Christian, a Muslim, an atheist, a secular humanist, everyone's moral compass is shaped by their religion, their culture, their upbringing, and sometimes just blind faith. I argued that Christians, for example, don't get the morality from logic and reason. They can't. They must derive it from faith and scripture. A Christian alone on an island might still think he can sin even if there's no other human ever affected. And that's fine. We don't all have to agree on why we think something is moral or immoral. But if we're going to live together without killing each other, we do need some kind of shared foundation. Something that lets people with wildly different beliefs coexist in peace, maximize liberty, and improve the quality of life without forcing everyone into one religion, one ideology, or one tribe. And that's what this chapter is about. So back to our three guys, the Christian, the Muslim, and the atheist. Each one controls his island. Each one can reach the others. Each one is capable of violence. So what are their options? Well, the way I see it, it boils down to only three. One, they don't interact at all. You stay on your island, I stay on mine. They might hate each other's beliefs, they might think the others are idiots or heretics, but if they leave each other alone, nobody's rights get violated. Nobody's forced. Nobody's harmed. Morally speaking, that's neutral and peaceful. Option number two, they interact by coercion. One or more of them decides, my way is right, so I'm going to force the others to comply. That's the road to war, oppression, torture, crusades, jihads, inquisitions, you name it. Might makes right. Whoever has the most power decides what is moral. The guy with the knife and no conscience wins. For a while. And option number three, they interact by consent. They can still think each other are wrong, misguided, or damned, but they agree not to use coercion. They trade, talk, negotiate, argue, ignore each other. Whatever they do, it's by choice. Each man keeps control of his own life and island, and that is how we get peace. Those are the only three categories of interaction that matter. No interaction, coercion, or consent. And that brings me to one of the core axioms of this whole series. I have a natural right to be left alone. If people understood just this one thing, 80% of the world's bullshit would disappear. Every human being has a natural right to be left alone. That's the big one. That is the grand poobah of moral foundation. If you leave me alone, my body, my property, my family, my decisions, then we will never have a moral problem between us. Disagreements? Sure. Different beliefs? Absolutely. But no moral violation. You violate my right to be left alone by force, threats, manipulation, or fraud, and now we have a problem. Now morality kicks in. Now justice comes into play. Now potentially violence becomes morally justified in self-defense. This is not a cute slogan. It's a survival rule written into our DNA. But to make this more concrete, let's unpack what it means, this right to be left alone. Because that's where natural rights come in. People throw this phrase around a lot, natural rights, human rights, God-given rights. I'm not using it in a legal sense. This isn't about whatever some government or UN committee declares on paper this decade. When I say natural rights, here's what I mean. They are innate. They are built into us as human animals. It's in our nature. They are inalienable. You don't just lose them because someone ignores them. And they're tied directly to our human nature, our genetics, our instincts, our emotions, our sense of fairness and justice. Some Enlightenment philosophers said our natural rights come from God. I disagree with the dependency there. If your rights only exist because God exists, then logically, if God doesn't exist, you have no rights. And that's nonsense. Having said that, whether our natural rights come from God, evolution, or cosmic RNG doesn't really matter for this discussion. What matters is we act like we have them, we feel rage when they're violated, and we instinctively understand when they're crossed, just like other social animals do. Humans are not special in that sense. Animals defend territory, protect their young, flee predators, fight back when cornered, and even show empathy and fairness. That this is mine or this isn't fair, anger isn't just culture, it's biology. The difference is we're the only animal smart enough to write rules about it. We can build moral and legal structure that either aligns with our natural rights and our instincts for fairness and justice, or we can fight them, creating constant moral friction, resentment, and justified violence. So with that in mind, let's take a deeper dive into rights for a second, because there are a lot of social media philosophers, debaters out there, influencers, who use the word rights as a basis to argue morality, politics, religion, and freedom. They'll throw around the word rights like it means the same thing in every context. It doesn't. And I think it's important that we all understand the distinction between the usage of the word rights so we can communicate intelligently and without confusion. So I'm going to break down rights clearly into 5 different categories. The first is natural rights, which we talked about briefly. They're real, they're universal, they're inherent. They're grounded in biology, genetics, and human nature. We'll discuss these more in depth in a little while, but for now, I'm referring to our innate rights of life, liberty, property, privacy, and children, or parental rights. These rights exist whether anybody recognizes them or not. The second type of rights are legal rights or civil rights, i.e., what the government says you're allowed to do. Legal rights come from legislation, constitutions, courts, judges, and bureaucrats. Your right to vote, your right to drive at 16, your right to claim Social Security, your right to own a firearm in certain states, your right to free speech as interpreted by the court. They also include civil rights, which are legal protections created to restrain governments and majorities. They aren't natural rights. They aren't moral rights. These are man-made rights created by governments and can be changed or revoked by political power. They're not universal, they're not eternal, and they're not moral by default. Legal rights can be moral, but they can also be evil. Slavery was once legal, segregation was legal, internment camps were once legal. So legal rights simply tell you what you're allowed to do according to the state, not according to morality. And then third, we have human rights, or collectivist rights. This is the modern activist, the United Nations, NGO, Progressive Collectivist Social Justice Worldview. They claim to believe in human rights, but what they call rights are not rights at all. Here's their formula. Every desire is a right, and every right creates someone else's obligation. For example, they say healthcare is a right, which means someone must be forced to provide it. Housing is a right, which means someone must be forced to pay for it. Education is a right, meaning someone must be forced to fund it. Emotional comfort is a right, meaning speech must be suppressed. Equality of outcomes is a right, meaning property must be confiscated. In a collectivist model, you don't have the right to be left alone. You have the right to take, and other people have the obligation to give. This flips natural rights upside down. A natural right protects your freedom from others. A collectivist right forces others to serve you. These aren't rights, they're demands. They depend entirely on the state using coercion. Think about our scenario with the Muslim, the Christian, and the atheist. Can any one of these 3 men demand that the other build their house? That they provide them with medical care? Or that they educate them? The notion is absurd and immoral. And again, requires using coercion. Okay, the fourth, hierarchical and divine rights. I'm going to bin these into the same category because they're based on the same kind of higher authority. And this religion authoritarian model still exists today, quietly spread through our society, but philosophically it's straight from the Middle Ages. In this model, a ruler has rights over its citizens. A husband has rights over his wife. A father has rights over his household. Priests, pastors, and elders have rights over their constituents. In this framework, rights equal the authority your role gives you over others. Everybody else, they don't have rights. They have duties. This is morality built on hierarchy, not autonomy. Obedience, not consent. Hierarchical rights get confused with moral rights, but they're not. They are permissions to exercise power, not protection for the individual. Loosely, the structure looks like this. Rights flow downward from God to elite men, then everyone else obeys. The system claims moral legitimacy because God said so. But here's the problem. If your rights can be revoked by a man in authority, they were never rights. They were privileges. And privileges are conditional. They evaporate the moment you step out of line. This is another one of those worldviews that destroy natural rights because you don't own your own life. Your superior does. You don't own your own liberty. It's granted by someone above you or powerful enough to enforce their will upon you. You don't own your own property. It can be seized for your own good, and consent becomes irrelevant. Obedience becomes moral duty. This is the same logic that justified feudalism, theocratic monarchies, inquisitions, crusades, slavery, and forced conversion. You can slap it with scripture and call it holy, but coercion wrapped in religion is still coercion. The Christian authoritarian stance collapses for one simple reason. Natural rights must protect you from authority, not hand authority control over your rights. If my right to live, speak, worship, or be left alone depends on whether some authority approves, then I don't have rights. I have a leash. I have privileges. And fifth, and arguably the most important, these are moral rights. This is the basis of the moral framework I am proving, so it's important that you understand exactly what I mean, since this definition will carry on throughout the rest of the series. Isn't it weird that there's no universally standard definition of moral rights in philosophy? In mainstream academic philosophy, the term moral rights is used loosely and inconsistently. It generally means rights that exist in the moral realm rather than in the legal realm. That's it. It's very vague, very broad, often circular. Different philosophical schools define moral rights differently. Kantian ethics see moral rights arising from human rationality and dignity. The Enlightenment philosophers, Lockean, natural law, they basically use moral rights and natural rights synonymously. Utilitarianism often denies the existence of moral rights entirely, since they're based on the outcomes. Virtue ethics, they barely use the term at all. Religious ethics, they base moral rights on divine command. There is no single authoritative definition. In political theory and UN rhetoric, moral rights often gets blurred with humanitarian rights, collectivist rights, positive rights, social entitlements, moral obligations, duties. Again, very inconsistent and very, very arbitrary, and by default, to a large degree, useless. So, moral rights, as I am defining them, is the only practical basis for legal and civil rights. It is the enforcement boundary for natural rights. In other words, a moral right is not something you possess, it's something you may morally defend with force when violated. Think of it this way: moral rights equals natural rights plus the justified use of force to defend them. If someone violates your life, liberty, property, privacy, children, you are morally justified in pushing back. It is your moral right to push back, with persuasion, with resistance, or with violence if necessary. That is the line in the sand. Natural rights describe your boundaries. Moral rights describes what you are morally allowed to do if somebody violates your natural rights. When your moral rights are violated, self-defense becomes justified. This principle alone separates moral societies from tyrannical ones. It challenges the notion of divine and hierarchical rights. It challenges the notion of collectivist and human rights. Humans are territorial, autonomy-seeking, self-protective primates. Every animal on Earth defends its territory, protects its resources, seeks freedom of movement, lashes out when controlled, forms agreements based on mutual advantage. Hierarchy-based morality ignores this. Collectivist morality ignore this. Only natural rights align with human nature because they ensure that you own your own body, you own your own labor, you own the fruits of your work, you own your own private life, you choose your associations, you can walk away from interactions you don't want. You are not the property of a king, a church, or a collective. And here's the part that both extremes hate. Consent is the foundation of moral behavior, not divine command, not collective demand, not ideology, and not authority. Consent. Everything else is coercion dressed up in a moral language. As I've mentioned before in Chapter 1, the last man on earth, the last living creature in existence, can do no wrong. Doing something wrong requires action, or maybe a better way of wording it is interactions with others. And how humans interact with each other determines the moral nature of those interactions, determines whether they're doing something wrong or not. Here's another foundational axiom. All human interactions fall into two buckets: consent or coercion. That's it. This is a simple binary truth. You're either acting by agreement or you're forcing someone's hand, and coercion is always immoral. Coercion is the umbrella term for everything that violates someone else's natural rights, and if we're serious about building a moral society, we have to universally agree that coercion is wrong. Coercion is when you get somebody to do something they wouldn't freely choose. It comes in many forms, sometimes obvious, sometimes subtle, but in every case it's about using force, threats, or manipulation to make someone do something they wouldn't otherwise knowingly do on their own. Coercion is the root of every violation of natural rights, and if we're going to live in a civilized, peaceful society, this has to be understood and rejected across the board. Coercion is always on the spectrum of wrong. At the extreme, murder, kidnapping, and slavery, assault, torture, rape, violent robbery. But there are also softer forms: intimidation, harassment, blackmail, extortion, emotional or psychological manipulation, lies, and fraud that trick people into agreements they never would have made if they knew the truth. If we're going to build a moral society, we have to agree coercion is immoral, always. The only moral way to interact with others is through honest, voluntary consent. We want others to do something. To be moral, we must use persuasion as a means of convincing others to do it. And that persuasion must be honest. For consent to be real, it has to be free of any form of coercion or manipulation. Informed consent is the key. Each party has to fully understand what they're agreeing to and the potential outcomes of that agreement. Honesty is essential. The moment you deceive someone into making a choice they wouldn't otherwise make, if you're lying, tricking, or misleading somebody, you cross back into coercion. Consent is also the backbone of free market economics. In trade and business, every voluntary exchange happens because both sides believe they're gaining something. No coercion, no force, just mutual agreement. This is why a free market based on consent is the only moral system for economic interactions. And oh, by the way, free markets are what has allowed us to grow wealth, improve our quality of life, and all but eliminate extreme poverty that's plagued mankind for tens of thousands of years. Morality is found in our actions, not our thoughts, intentions, or beliefs. Okay, now let's go back, as I said I would. Let's break down the right to be left alone into 5 core natural rights: the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to property, right to privacy, and parental rights, or the ownership and responsibility for children. We're going to hit each one. Number 1, the natural right to life. This should be the least controversial. You have a natural right to live. Every animal does. When attacked, animals defend themselves, flee, or fight. Humans are no different. If someone tries to kill you, you have every moral right to use whatever force is necessary to stop them, up to and including killing them. Doesn't matter who they are. A random murderer in an alley, a neighbor who hates your politics, a Nazi officer banging on your door because of your ethnicity, a religious fanatic who thinks God told him to punish you. When an attacker violates your natural right to life, your moral animal right to defend yourself is triggered. This is a genetic reality. It doesn't matter why they're attacking you. The reason is irrelevant. Your right to survive stands above everything. You might not win the fight, but the act of fighting back is always morally justified. Your right to life is absolute, and defending it, if necessary with lethal force, is your moral right. It includes access to basic survival resources: food, water, clean air. Not for free necessarily, but no one has a right to poison your water or block you from trying to get anything you need to live. You have a right to protect yourself from the threats which endanger your life. If someone threatens you, say by pointing a gun at you, you are morally justified in eliminating that threat by any means necessary. But this right to life doesn't stop at just physical survival. It extends to everything that has to do with your body and your well-being. You own your body, no one else. And that means that you alone have the right to make decisions about it. Whether it's managing health risks, seeking experimental treatments, or choosing what to eat or drink, the decisions are yours to make. That's your right. You want to live an unhealthy lifestyle? That's on you. You want to drink, smoke, or take drugs? That's your call, because it's your life. And yes, if you ever choose to end your life, that's your choice too. No one has the moral authority to tell you otherwise, because you are in control of your own existence. As long as you're not endangering someone else's life, your body and your choices are yours to own. You control the risks you take with your life, to include engaging in dangerous activities. The right to life also includes decisions related to your health. Everything from family planning to reproductive health. Whether it's about pregnancy, childbirth, or other medical treatments, those are your decisions to make. No one, not your neighbors, not your community, and certainly not your government, has the moral right to tell you what you can and cannot do with your body. Think about it this way. You either own your body 100% or you don't. There is no in between. So, do you believe that you own your body 100%? And if you say you don't own your body, then what percentage of your body is not completely owned by you? 5%? 50%? And if you don't own your entire body, who owns the portion of your body that's not owned by you? The government? Society? Let's use reason, people. If you don't own 100% of your body, then logic dictates something or someone else owns part of your body, owns the remaining part of your body that you don't own. By default, if someone owns part of your body, part of your life, that would make you a part slave, right? Number 2, the natural right to liberty. Right to liberty says, don't put me in a cage, physically, legally, or economically, if I haven't violated anyone else's natural rights. Humans are wildly different from each other. different goals, different temperaments, different dreams, different desires. There's no one lifestyle that makes everyone happy. Liberty means you're free to pursue your own happiness, your own way, as long as you're not violating anyone else's natural rights. You're free to speak, to believe, to question, to worship, or not worship. You're free to associate with whoever you want and avoid whoever you want. You're free to trade, work, experiment, and explore. The list of liberties is endless because everybody's path to happiness is different. That includes things like free speech, freedom of religion, including freedom from religion. Everybody has a right to voice their opinions, even those opinions that are unpopular and controversial. It doesn't matter if it is righteous or racist, intelligent or ignorant, factually correct or incorrect, pro-government or anti-government. It is critical that the right to free speech never be censored. On the flip side, everyone also has the right to ignore others' ideas or beliefs and maintain their own. Without free speech, we'd still be living in the dark ages. So, if you have a right to liberty, no one has the right to restrict your liberty. Not through laws, not through mandates, and not through force. And restrictions to liberty can come in many different flavors, with extreme cases being abduction, being held in captivity, or enslaved. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that for some reason you were abducted and taken somewhere to be a slave. I would argue that you have every moral right and are justified in neutralizing or killing your captor, master, or whatever you want to call them, to free yourself so you can get home. If you found a meat cleaver, you would have every moral justification to slice and dice your way out of that prison camp. You would be morally justified in killing anyone who is preventing you from leaving. Morally, not legally, you are justified in doing whatever it takes to get out. Furthermore, your family and loved ones would also be morally justified in killing anyone who's preventing you from leaving and holding you captive. Now let's compare that to modern reality. Well, how about certain states throwing people into prison for marijuana use, incarcerating them, placing them into violent captivity, and then using them as slave labor to fight wildfires? This is government-sanctioned, morally abhorrent, and detestable violation of our natural rights. Is there much difference between being abducted into slavery and being in prison for a victimless crime? In both cases, innocent people are taken from their families, deprived of their freedom, and made to work under duress. This is a problem, a serious problem, and it highlights the dangers of allowing the divergence of legality and morality. Understand something, just because something is legal doesn't make it moral. As long as you are not infringing on someone else's rights, your personal freedoms should be respected. Number 3, the natural right to property. We'll go much deeper on this in a future chapter, but here's the core. Property is anything you can rightfully own, things that you build, buy, create, or trade for. You have a natural right to the fruits of your labor. If you spend time and energy creating value and someone else can just take it with no consequences, why would you? If the fruits of your labor are going to be seized, redistributed, or devalued at the whim of somebody else, what's the point of working? Your hard work no longer belongs to you. It is fair game for whoever has the power to take it. The drive to build, to grow, to pursue better opportunities fades when there's no guarantee you'll be able to keep what you've earned. This isn't just philosophy. This is human nature. This is the foundation of economics, wealth creation, and why some societies escape poverty and others don't. When people can own their own property, keep what they earn, and trade freely by consent, societies flourish. When property is constantly stolen, seized, redistributed by force, or treated as a collective, societies collapse into corruption, apathy, and poverty. Your property is an extension of your life and your liberty. If you don't have the right to own your own property, by default, you become a servant, working for someone else's benefit, with no ability to claim the results of your effort. Imagine working your entire life only to have everything taken from you, whether it's a house you've built, a business you've grown, or the wealth you've accumulated for your children. This is becoming a real danger. As the government continues to grow out of control, property rights violations continue to increase. Don't kid yourself. Slavery, serfdom, tyranny are all natural outcomes of the world without the right to property, where individuals are reduced to being cogs in someone else's machine. In the end, property rights aren't just about wealth or material possessions. They are the bedrock of human freedom, security, and progress. Without them, there is no liberty. There is no future. There's no hope for a society that respects individual effort and rewards hard work. Number 4, the natural right to privacy. You have a right to control access to your personal information, thoughts, actions, and relationships. Without privacy, you lose autonomy, you lose dignity, you become easily controlled, shamed, and manipulated. In today's social media plus surveillance world, this is more important than ever. Privacy protects you from being exposed, shamed, blackmailed, being consistently watched and judged, being pressured into conformity or else. If you're always being watched, you start to self-censor. You stop exploring controversial ideas. You stop growing. You stop thinking clearly. You stop becoming fully human, and you start becoming British. Privacy protects your well-being by giving you control over your life, how you choose to live it, what you choose to share, and what you choose to keep to yourself. At its core, privacy is about control. The control over your personal information, your thoughts, and your actions. You get to decide how much of your life is exposed to others. No one has the right to force you into sharing what you don't want to share. This control is essential for autonomy. Respecting someone's privacy means respecting their rights to decide what stays private and what becomes public. Privacy is not a luxury. It's a shield against coercion. And with the modern tech and artificial intelligence, if we don't defend privacy as a natural right, we are screwed. As a society, we should be concerned that these might become tools for totalitarianism. We have a natural right to form and explore our own thoughts, beliefs, and emotions in private, without the fear of someone watching or judging us. When people feel like they're under surveillance, they stop being authentic. They start to conform. They suppress their true selves, and their personal growth stalls. And they are no longer free to pursue their happiness without being harassed. If you lose your privacy, you're at the mercy of those with power, whether it's the government pushing political agendas, corporations aiming to manipulate your buying habits, or even the individuals trying to control or shame you. Privacy is what stands between you and the social, political, and commercial pressures that seek to twist your decisions. It is not beyond technology to have a flying network of drones with facial recognition monitoring your every movement, your every phone call, your interaction with others, your speech. And Lord help us when somebody starts proposing chipping us to make that easier and more cost-effective. If we don't start fighting back and course-correcting our approach to privacy, we're going to find ourselves in a future where personal freedom is just an illusion. And finally, number 5, natural parental rights, or as I like to call it, parental ownership. Now, I get it. The term ownership might make some people feel uncomfortable, but let's be clear. Parents own their children, and no one has a greater claim. Not teachers, not the community, and certainly not the government. Unlike most animals, human children are born completely dependent. They don't just pop out and start fending for themselves. They require years of care and guidance, which means their parents, who brought them into this world, hold the natural right and responsibility to raise them. I can't even believe this is controversial. This right stems from a biological bond that is so deep and fundamental that most parents would sacrifice their own lives without hesitation to protect their children. In those early years of life, parents are the ultimate authority in a child's life because without them, the child wouldn't survive. So let me state it in no uncertain terms. I believe parents, and parents alone, have the sole authority to make decisions in the best interest of their children. They are the best suited to understand the child's needs, interests, and potential because no one's more invested in their well-being than the parents themselves. This isn't something the state or society can replicate. A bureaucrat does not know what's best for your child. Parents do. Parental rights include making decisions about education, religion, healthcare, and daily life. You decide what values, traditions, and beliefs your child will be raised with. That's part of shaping their character, their ethics, and their behavior. And let's be real, without parental rights, parents wouldn't even have the authority needed to fulfill their moral obligations. How can you be responsible for your child's welfare if you're not allowed to make decisions about their life? Yet, in today's world, modern philosophy and so-called legal experts are trying to dismantle this concept. We need look no further than the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC. They outright claim that parents don't own their children, and the kids should be treated as autonomous individuals from the start. Now, according to this logic, the government and society get to decide what's best for your child, not you, the parent. The same government that messes most things up, the same society that's influenced by fads and ideologies, believe they should have more say over your child than you. I cannot emphasize enough that this type of thinking is extremely dangerous. If the state or society can claim a greater right over your child than you, what stops them from taking your child if you don't subscribe to their beliefs? This is a direct threat to the natural parental rights, and it should alarm everyone who values freedom and family. When those in power believe they have a claim over your child that supersedes yours, we've opened the door to serious moral conflicts. And as we discussed earlier, this kind of violation of natural rights can lead to justifiable resistance. And yes, even violence. I can't speak for other parents, but I know if somebody had come to take my children away, holy hell would break out. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that a child's independence grows as they age. By the time they reach adulthood, they should be able to make their own decisions and stand on their own 2 feet. But this evolution of autonomy doesn't happen overnight. A child isn't born with full independence. They develop it over time. In fact, mental and emotional development continues until about the age of 25. So think of it like a 25-year amortization process. Parents will hold the most authority when the child is young, and as a child grows and matures, that authority will lessen, while the child's autonomy continually increases. This balance shifts over time, but the idea that anyone, whether it's the government, community, or anybody else, has a greater right to your child than you? Sure, there are exceptions in cases of abuse or neglect, but in normal, caring household, parents hold the natural right to guide their child's lives. This isn't just about morality or traditions, it's a biological truth. Parents and their children are connected in a way that no institution or government can replicate. And if we start allowing anyone to undermine that natural connection, we risk tearing apart the very fabric of family life and society. All right, so that was the fire hose version to the 5 natural rights of life, liberty, property, privacy, and parental authority. With that all said, let's go back to the 3 islands one last time, to our 3 men standing on the 3 islands. A Christian, a Muslim, and an atheist. 3 men. 3 worldviews, 3 moral universes floating on the same ocean. The atheist is simple. He doesn't care what others believe. He accepts the natural rights that we just walked through, and he wants to be left alone. No mission, no crusade, no compulsion. Now, the Christian, he does have a mission. Go and make disciples of all nations. So he gets in his little wooden boat. He rows across the water. He preaches, he argues, he persuades. He tries to win a soul. And that's fine, as long as he stops when the atheist says no. Because the word no is the wall that protects all free people. It is the boundary between persuasion and tyranny. If the Christian crosses that line, if he says, believe, or the torture rack decides your fate, take, for example, the Spanish Inquisition. It used power of the Roman Catholic Church to enforce Christian compliance, and heretics who refused to recant were tortured or killed. If the Christian in our scenario tries to pull an Inquisition-style coercion, threatening the atheist's natural rights to life and liberty, then the atheist is morally justified in anything that protects his life, lying, running, fighting, and even killing him. Because once coercion enters the equation, the Christian has forfeited his moral legitimacy. Now, let's go to the 3rd island, the Muslim. Not some peaceful, modernized Muslim who believes in coexistence and consent. I'm talking about the traditional Muslim, the one that's shaped by classical Islamic jurisprudence, where apostates, defectors, deserve death, blasphemers deserve death, unbelievers must submit, and Sharia must be imposed by force. Not asked for, not voted on, imposed. This man isn't rowing over to have a conversation. He's rowing over with a demand. He believes with all of his heart that he is commanded not just to share his faith, but to enforce it, to convert the Christian and the atheist. And if they refuse, then violence isn't a tragedy, it's obedience. This is not fringe. This is not theoretical. And these beliefs are mainstream in large parts of the Islamic world today. They shape laws. They justify executions. They silence dissent. And they crush liberty. And when this mindset arrives in the West, a civilization built on freedom of conscience, it doesn't assimilate. It collides. Because Western liberty is built on one foundational truth. No man has a right to force another to obey his moral code. Traditional Islam rejects that truth. Not all Muslims, not all interpretations, but the traditional version, the one with the real power in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, openly reject the idea that non-believers have equal rights. And though it might be a topic for a different podcast, that's why the Islamic influx into the Western culture is not just an immigration issue. It's a philosophical collision between 2 incompatible moral systems. One system says, let me persuade you. The other system says, submit or else. These are not 2 paths that merge. Now, here's the pivot point in this entire chapter. You can be a Christian, a Muslim, atheist, Buddhist, whatever. You can think everybody else is wrong. You can argue, debate, persuade, convert, preach, mock, or walk away. But the moment you cross into coercion, the moment you believe you have a right to force another person to obey your doctrine, you become the villain in the story. Because natural rights are simple. Every human being owns their life. And the instant you ignore this truth, you are not defending your faith, you are violating another man's natural rights. This is why liberty must be defended. And this is why any belief system, religious or otherwise, that commands coercion is a threat that free men cannot ignore. In the famous words of Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. So let me conclude with this, and why I think it matters right now. When I was younger, I honestly thought that we were on a steady upward trajectory when it comes to morality. We had more liberty, more reason, more progress. We ended slavery. We expanded basic civil rights. We recognized bodily autonomy in more areas. We legalized interracial marriage, then same-sex marriage. We legalized marijuana. We slowly clawed our way toward more consistent respect for individual rights. And now, we're regressing. Free speech is under attack from all sides. Governments and corporations are biscuit away from having a probe up your ass. People are still being thrown in cages for victimless crimes. Parents are being told they're basically co-owners of their kids with the state. And on top of that, we're getting dumber as a society. We are getting dumber. Literally, look up reverse Flynn effect. For the first time in recorded history, the average IQ scores in developed countries are dropping, not rising, dropping. Critical thinking is collapsing. Attention spans are fried. People live on short-form dopamine hits and outrage cycles. I'll be honest, it's one of the reasons I'm breaking this material into smaller chapters and episodes, because the ability to sit with a long, structured argument is actually becoming pretty rare. But if you can still think, if you're still willing to slow down and reason, then you have a responsibility to yourself, to your family, and to, frankly, to whatever's left of civilization, to understand these foundations. Natural rights, the right to be left alone, the difference between consent and coercion. In the next chapter, we're going to crank up the complexity another notch. We're going to go from 3 islands to 100 islands. We'll mix in men and women, limited resources like food and water, environmental issues, and the beginning of trade and conflict. We'll see how natural rights and consent versus coercion play out in something that looks more like the real world. Because again, this isn't just theory. If we don't rebuild a shared moral foundation around these ideas, the alternative is pretty simple. More coercion, more fragmentation, more division, more justified anger and violence. You owe it to yourself and to whatever future's coming after us to get this right now while we still have the freedom, the tech, and the time to fix it. If you walk away from this chapter remembering only one thing, let it be this. Everyone has a natural right to be left alone. Every moral system that rejects natural rights eventually justifies controlling people for their own good. The religious authoritarian wants to control you to save your soul. The collectivist wants to control you to save society. But control is control. Coercion is coercion, and slavery with a mission statement is still slavery. Only natural rights, only consent-based morality let free people achieve their desires and live in peace without stepping on each other's throats. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, and on that note, peace out from Virginia.